Welcome to the Islam Has a Right to Know. This series is put on by Seventh-day Adventist Christian people who have studied into the archives of church history, of Protestantism, of the Arab world, and into the founding and how the Quran came about. And with the attitude in the world right now, we find that no one is sharing with the world of Islam your history in the Bible. Many Christians, sad to say, are claiming that Islam is started by the devil, and the Quran is the devil's book. But I want to let you know, personally, there's one God, Allah. And Islam came about as a result of Muhammad. Muslims say that he had visions. I believe he did too. And we'll show that Islam was brought about for a specific purpose that's not bad, but good. My friends, this is the map of the material we're sharing. The yellow arrows on the left point out the river Nile. The yellow arrows on the right, they point out the Euphrates River. It dumps into the Persian Gulf. Euphrates comes from up north to the northwest side of the Black Sea, from Turkey in that area. The Nile goes down through Africa, and it's sizable property. And as we read the promises, these promises were given to God. Moses wrote them down, and he wrote them down for the children of Israel when they were coming out of Egypt during that era, during that time frame. And it says, and this exactly fits the Arab people and the people of Israel. Also fits exactly Sarah and Hagar. If a man have two wives, one beloved and another unloved, and they've both borne him children, both the beloved and the unloved, and of the firstborn son be hers that was unloved, which is Ishmael. It lays it out perfectly clear right here who they are. And the loved wife would be Sarah, and the unloved wife would be Hagar. And it says this, then it shall be, when he maketh his sons to inherit that which he hath, he may not make the son of the beloved firstborn before the son of the unloved, which is indeed the firstborn. In other words, no matter what he wanted to do, or Sarah wanted him to do, he could not make Isaac the firstborn because he wasn't. The firstborn son was Ishmael, whose mother was Hagar. That's how this, and that's the way it's stated biblically. And we need to remember that God's word was given for a reason so that we would know what He's meant and what He's saying. The last verse of these three verses says, but he, talking about the husband of the two wives, shall acknowledge the son of the unloved for the firstborn by giving him a double portion of all that he hath. Because it tells us a reason here, for he is the beginning of his strength, the right of the firstborn is his. This is not, we're not going to jump onto another slide right here because we need to understand the full repercussions of this statement right here. Is that, number one, the firstborn son was given a double portion of all that Abraham had. And he was promised by God in Genesis chapter 15, all the property from the Nile to the Euphrates, and that was to be the portion that went to the firstborn son. And that was the Arab people. And also because God wanted the Arab people to have the wealth of the world in their possession. And they have had that possession of wealth, because the Arab world is known for their oil. The beginning of his strength. In other words, time and again, Allah used the Arab people to bring judgment upon Israel because of their sin and apostasy. Many times we as Christians read the Bible and we get so angry, so upset at these different people in the Bible that bring judgment upon Israel. The reason that was permitted because of Israel's sin and apostasy. Period. None other reason. And the double portion, all this wealth, because it was going to be needed at the end of time. Because the work was going to be finished. As we get later into another program here, we're going to talk about Isaiah chapter 60. It shows about the work of the Arab people at the very end of time. At the very end of time. And that work is going to have to be funded by a lot of money. As well, the persecution that's going to come to the other side of the family, because they had the concept of righteousness. The Quran talks about righteousness. And the other side of the family is going to be persecuted. Who's going to come to their aid? But the children of the Arab people. That's coming up in another program later. In Genesis chapter 17, verses 8 through 22, it says, "And I will give unto thee, and to thy seed after thee, the land wherein thou art stranger, all the land of Canaan, for an everlasting possession, and I will be their God. God said unto Abraham, Thou shalt keep my covenant, therefore, thou and thy seed after thee in all their generations. This is my covenant which ye shall keep between me and you, and thy seed after thee. Every man-child among you shall be circumcised." This is where circumcision comes from. It comes from God, of what He told Abraham. "And God said unto Abraham, As for Sarai thy wife, thou shalt not call her name Sarai, but Sarah shall her name be." So the name was changed, not only for Abram to Abraham, but from Sarai to Sarah. And in verse 16 it says, "And I will bless her, and give thee a son also of her. I will bless her, and she shall be a mother of nations, kings of people shall be of her." This is the promise of another son. And this was a shock to Abram, because as far as he was concerned, Ishmael was the only son. For 13 years, Ishmael was the only son. And as far as Abraham was concerned, because there was no record of a communication from a God, except right here in chapter 17, that there's going to be another son brought into the program. And Abraham was concerned, because then Abraham fell on his face and laughed and said in his heart, "Shall a child be born unto him that's 100 years old? Then shall Sarah that's 90 years old bear?" But the love of Abraham for Ishmael finally spoke out and said, "Oh, that Ishmael might live before thee." Remember, as far as Abraham was concerned, Ishmael was his only child. And Ishmael would have been told that. And at the same time, there was one of the sons of Noah was still alive. And since Abraham came from the Ur of the Chaldees, which was up where Noah's Ark was grounded, that the son of Noah would know who Abraham is and would want to come and see him and tell the story about how God dealt with the people at the time of the flood. And as Lot may have come to their campfire and stayed with them, Ishmael would have listened. Ishmael would have been told about the angel standing in front of the Garden of Eden with a drawn sword. Would have been told about the flood. Would have told about the people who were destroyed because of their sin and apostasy. My friends, there will never be another flood on this earth. But there will be a consuming fire that'll burn the sinners up who haven't repented. And the Quran's clear about that. We'll look at one of those verses a little later that says, those who come to the end with their sin, to them is death or hell. My friends, this is important. Ishmael knew a lot of things, but there is now another son coming in. And God said to Abraham, Sarah thy wife shall bear thee indeed a son. Thou shalt call his name Isaac, and I will establish my covenant with him for an everlasting covenant, and with his seed after him. So here's an agreement that God is making to Abram, that there's going to be a covenant or an agreement established with Isaac. Because now we have the history all done and we look back at it. The Arab people received the wealth. They received the strength and the power because they were needed during the time of what the Christian referred to as the Reformation. Muslims shed their blood, as we'll read about here in a couple more programs, to protect the Christians. And this covenant, Isa el-Messiah came through the lineage of Isaac, not through the lineage of Ishmael, because this is the covenant that Allah established with Abraham's son Isaac. But it goes on. It says, as for Ishmael, I have heard you. Behold, I have blessed him. Doesn't say I will bless him. Not only will he bless him, but he has, and he will continue to bless him until the very end of time. We Seventh-day Adventists believe we have a message for the world. Isa el-Messiah is coming. The end of the world is here, is coming, and you Muslims have not been told that by any Christians that we are aware of. My friends, I wrote a book called Islam, God's Forgotten Blessing. Because as I read the history of your people, Islam is a blessing to the Christian world. And we'll talk about that in a few programs hence. Behold, I have blessed him. I'll make him fruitful and will multiply him exceedingly. 12 princes shall he beget. I'll make him a great nation. Just as the children of Israel were given 12 tribes, 12 nations, 12 princes, 12 princes of Ishmael are also there. God had to be fair. 12 to one side, 12 to the other. This is the map. This is what we're talking about. This area of the world. The red arrows show Palestine or Canaan, the promise that God had given to Abraham. This is where Israel will live. Verse 21, but my covenant will I establish with Isaac, which Sarah shall bear unto thee this set time next year. So God made a promise to Abraham. Something was going to happen in a year's time. And Sarah. And his covenant was going to be ratified at that point in time. Chapter 21, verse 1 and 2. This story of Genesis here is when Isaac was old enough to be weaned from his mother's breast. And there's a lot of stories in Genesis that I'm not covering. I'm covering the stories that relate to the Arab people and that relate with the children of Israel. This is why this presentation is being made. And all the speakers that come after me, we're talking about the same thing. We're talking about the promises that Allah had made to Abraham. And that it made to Abraham not only for Isaac, but for Ishmael as well. Because we believe Ishmael's side of the family has not had the benefit of what we've come to realize, that the concept is in the Quran there, true, when it talks about righteousness. Believe in righteousness. This is essential for salvation. And that's why we believe this story needs to be told. 23% of the world is Muslims today. For much of my life, I assumed all Muslims were going to be destroyed because I didn't understand the love of Allah at all. Because I didn't fully understand what was stated here in the Old Testament that we've already shared with you. I assumed Islam would be lost. But I'm wrong. I was wrong. Years ago, I had to ask the Lord for forgiveness and repentance. And I decided to make this my work for the rest of my life. I'm 73 years old now, but I want to die at the time that the other side of the family has heard the message of salvation, of heaven is real. It's a real place. Every single Muslim ought to look forward with great joy because the Bible is true. The Word of God is true. The concept of righteousness, the concept of a resurrection the Quran talks about is true. My friends, my Muslim friends, God cares for you and loves you very much. And Abraham called the name of his son that was born unto him, which Sarah bare unto him, Isaac. Interesting. Abraham, these first two children, he didn't get to choose the name. Allah did. Just as Allah gave to Hagar, your son's going to be called Ishmael, God is telling Abraham, this son is going to be called Isaac. So Abraham circumcised his son Isaac, being 8 days old, as God had commanded him. And Abraham was 100 years old when Isaac his son was born unto him. And Sarah said, God hath made me to laugh, and so that all here will laugh with me. And she said, who would have said unto Abraham that Sarah should have given children suck? For I have borne him a son in his old age. And the child grew and was weaned. And Abraham made a feast the same day that Isaac was weaned. Now, the rest of this story is kind of a sad story in one sense. But it's still that God is orchestrating the events happening here, that I have to set my human feelings aside because God's directing and God is in charge. In other words, Allah is calling what's going to happen. Verse 9. And Sarah saw the son of Hagar, the Egyptian, which she had borne unto Abraham, mocking. That's all it says in the Bible. But as a son who was told he was the promised son, all of his life, up through 13 years old, and by now he was probably 14. All of a sudden, those promises were given to the other son. The person who acted like Allah about the son of Mary, Isa el-Messiah, he had the spirit of what the Anointed One was all about. He had the spirit. He submitted his will to Allah. Wherefore she said unto Abraham, cast out this bondwoman and her son, for the son of this bondwoman shall not be heir with my son, even with Isaac. It's interesting, in the Bible earlier, Hagar was called a wife. But now the bitterness of Sarah is present. She's now saying a bondwoman, a slave. The sad thing, human feelings take over. But God's in charge. God knew Isaac and he knew Ishmael. And the thing was very grievous in Abraham's sight because of his son. And God said unto Abraham, Let it not be grievous in thy sight because of the lad, because of thy bondwoman, and all that Sarah has said unto thee, hearken or listen unto her voice. For in Isaac shall thy seed be called. So Abraham was going to be called after the lineage of Isaac, or Israel, not after Ishmael. But Ishmael had a calling, a large calling. Because here's the promise. And also the son of the bondwoman Ishmael, or bondwoman, Ishmael will I make a nation, because he is thy seed. Allah made it clear. The reason, because he's your son. Because in Genesis chapter 15, God said your son is going to come from your own bosom, from your own bowels. This is Ishmael. He came from the action between Abraham and Hagar. And he is thy seed. So he's heirs of the promise. So the promise that was given to Isaac, the same promise had to be given to the other side of the family as far as what they were going to inherit. Abraham rose up early in the morning, took bread and a bottle of water, gave it unto Hagar, putting it on her shoulder, and the child, and sent her away. And she departed and wandered in the wilderness of Beersheba. And the water was spent in the bottle, and she cast the child under one of the shrubs. And she went and sat down over against him a good way off, as it were a bowshot, for she said, let me not see the death of the child. And she sat over against him and lifted up her voice and cried or wept. My friends, God heard her cry for help. Did God abandon her? And God heard the voice of the lad. And the angel of God called to Hagar out of heaven and said unto her, what aileth thee, Hagar? Fear not, for God hath heard the voice of the lad where he is. Arise, lift up the lad, and hold him in thy hand, for I will make him a great nation. And this is the map again. This here, the blue arrow, shows Mecca. Tradition has it, that's where she was. And I happen to believe that tradition, even as a Christian today. Because, verse 19, God opened her eyes, and she saw a well of water, and she went and filled the bottle with water and gave the lad to drink. And God was with the lad. He grew and dwelt in the wilderness, became an archer. My Muslim friends, you know this better than I do. That water, or that well, is called Zamzam water. And I've been fortunate to drink water from that well. There was a lady, a Muslim lady, who knew I was going to come and visit her 6 months before I arrived in Sydney, Australia. And she had bought Zamzam water in a bottle. And after she had fed us a good food, good meal, a leg of lamb, she came out and she gave me this water. And she told me the story of Zamzam water. That this came from the well that God had provided for Hagar and Ishmael. I was blessed, I was honored to drink water from that well. And now we can buy that water here from Arab stores. Here in the United States of America, Zamzam water. I'm blessed. We still have the water with us today because that well, I believe, is still going as a result of God putting that to Hagar so that they could drink and they could eat. My friends, you Muslims have an opportunity to go to the Hajj. And you can see the well and drink the water from that well. I want to encourage you. That's a promise from God to your side of the family. It's real. The promises of God are real. Because Hagar and Ishmael were blessed. Because those blessings came from the father Abraham, who had the promise given to him by Allah in chapter 15 of Genesis. In Genesis chapter 25, verse 1 through 8, then again, Abram took a wife. You see, Sarah had passed away. He took a wife, and her name was Keturah. She bare him children, Zimran, Joshan, Medan, Midian, Ishbak, Shua. And Joshan begat Sheba and Dedan. And the sons of Dedan were Ashrim, Letshim. And the sons of Midian, Ephah, Epher, Hancock, Abadiah, Eladad. All these were the children of Keturah. We're going to come across the names of some of these children again before we leave the Old Testament. These are major players at the end of time. I'm talking about the time that you're hearing this till the end of the world. These names, their tribes, their offspring, are going to play an important role at the end of time in a positive light. And the sons of Midian, Ephah, Epher, Hancock, Abadiah, Eladad, all these were the children of Keturah. Abraham gave all that he had to Isaac, and Abraham gave up the ghost, or words, he died, in a good old age, a man full of years. He was gathered to his people. His sons Isaac and Ishmael buried him in a cave of Machpelah. Now, you have a tradition in the Arab world. When a person passes away, they try to get him or her in the ground before sundown. That's obviously was a tradition started at this point in time or before. Because it also tells me another thing, that Ishmael wasn't a long way away. Because for him to be there with Isaac, to bury their father before the sun goes down, they had to go get him, because he didn't live in Isaac's camp. He lived in his own camp, a ways away, but he was able to be gotten quickly. Your father's passed away. Come quickly. And they did. His sons Isaac and Ishmael buried him in the cave of Machpelah. This is important to realize. Isaac and Ishmael were not antagonistic and mad at one another to want to kill one another. Because think about this. If Ishmael was jealous of Isaac, at this point in time, he could have killed Isaac and grabbed all that he had because he had the strength. But Ishmael was not that way. He was kind. And they got along well together because they loved their father. And they also knew their father was led by Allah completely. They were comfortable in that promise. Comfortable in that promise. And Abraham gave all that he had to Isaac and unto the sons of the concubines, which Abraham had. Abraham gave gifts and sent them away from Isaac his son, while he yet lived eastward into the country of the east. Yes, Ishmael was in the country of the east. And these days, the years of Abraham's life, which he lived to be 115 years, or 145 years old, then Abraham gave up the ghost, died in a good old age, an old man full of years, and was gathered to his people. And I just want to encourage you. Abraham's sons were obviously friends, and it was a tough time in Ishmael's life because he had been usurped, because God directed. Ishmael did not get angry at Allah. There's no record of that whatsoever. He was a good person. He was a man of God. At the same time, he struggled because his father had passed away. And I want to encourage you. Allah has not given up on the Arab people. He cares. He loves you very much. And that's why we're bringing these programs to you, because of His love for you.